The wind had a voice in the Aryan spires, and that day it screamed. It was a raw, primal sound that clawed at the stone houses of Silverwood, a village huddled in a rare, sheltered valley. Kalen felt the scream in his bones, a familiar phantom of icy dread. From his window, he watched the sky, a bruised canvas of slate gray and angry violet. The great pines at the valley's edge, ancient and unbowed, bent like supplicants before the gale's fury. This was no mere storm. This was a shrieking wind, a phenomenon unique to the spires, a tantrum of the heavens that could strip rock from the cliffs and send men spiraling into the endless void between the plateaus. For most, it was a day to bar the doors and feed the fire. For Kalen, it was a day of ghosts. He ran a hand over his face, the tremor in his fingers betraying his calm exterior. He could still see it, a memory seared behind his eyes, another shrieking wind, 10 years ago. His father, the village wind caller, standing on the precipice of Razorback Ridge, his cloak snapping like a banner. A younger Kalen beside him, exhilarated. And a reckless friend, Boren, daring the gust. Then, the shriek had intensified, the rock had groaned, and his world had fallen away, leaving only the deafening roar and an empty space where his father had been. "Kale, are you listening?" The soft voice pulled him from the precipice of his memory. His sister, Elara, stood in the doorway, her small frame wrapped in a thick woolen shawl. Her face, usually so full of light, was pale, her breath coming in shallow wisps. "Just watching the storm," he lied, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "It's a fierce one. The elders say the spirits are angry." She shuffled to the hearth, her movements slow, lethargic. For weeks, she'd been fading. A persistent cough had deepened, a weariness had settled into her bones, and now, a feverish pallor clung to her skin. He turned from the window, his heart constricting. "The elders say that about every sneeze and stumble. You need to rest." She tried to smile. "I'm tired of resting." She swayed, and Kalen was across the small room in 3 long strides, catching her before she fell. Her skin was hot to the touch, her body unnervingly light. "Elara," he cried, his voice tight with panic. He carried her to her cot, his mind a maelstrom of fear that dwarfed the storm outside. The village healer, old Maeve, was summoned. She came with her satchel of dried herbs and grim pronouncements, her face as weathered as the spires themselves. After a long examination, her gaze met Kalen's, and the pity in her eyes was a physical blow. "It's the wasting sickness," she said, her voice a low rasp. "I've seen it twice before in my long years. It starts like a chill in the lungs and, it doesn't let go." "There has to be something," Kalen pleaded, his hands clenched. "A poultice? A tonic?" Maeve shook her head slowly. "The common remedies are useless. There is only one thing, a legend, really. A story my grandmother told me." She paused, as if weighing the cruelty of offering a sliver of impossible hope. "High on the summit of Mount Cinder, the most treacherous of all the spires, they say a flower grows in a caldera sheltered from the wind. They call it the sun petal. It's said to bloom even in the deepest freeze, drawing its warmth from the mountain's core. The legends say a single petal, steeped in spring water, can cure any illness." Kalen felt the air leave his lungs. Mount Cinder. It was a spire of nightmares, a jagged tooth of black rock that scraped the clouds, perpetually shrouded in storms. No one from Silverwood had attempted the climb in generations. It was the very peak where his father had been training him, the peak they were to summit together. "It's a myth," he whispered, the words tasting of ash. "Perhaps," Maeve conceded, packing her herbs. But it is the only myth we have left. I am sorry, Kaelin. After she left, Kaelin sat by Alara's side, watching the fever paint flush circles on her cheeks. The shrieking wind outside howled its mournful song, an echo of his own despair. To climb the spires, to face the very element that had stolen his past and crippled his future, it was impossible. The wind-caller's son, who could no longer bear to stand on a high ledge. The boy who once read the currents like a book, now deafened by the ghost of a single scream. He couldn't do it. He would watch his sister fade, a prisoner of his own fear. 3 days passed. The storm abated, leaving a world scoured clean and unnaturally silent. Alara grew weaker. She barely spoke, her energy consumed by the simple act of breathing. Kaelin was a ghost in his own home, haunted by helplessness. Then, a stranger arrived. She walked into Silverwood with the confident stride of someone unaccustomed to the spire's thin air. She was a lowlander, that much was clear from her practical gear of waxed canvas and oiled leather, so different from the homespun wool of the villagers. Her hair was a dark braid, and her eyes were the color of moss, sharp and analytical. She carried a heavy pack and a rolled-up chart case. She sought out the village elder, but it was Kaelin she was directed to. "They say you are the son of Aran, the last wind-caller," she said, her voice clear and direct, without the hushed reverence the villagers used when speaking his father's name. "They say you knew the paths better than anyone." "I don't guide anymore," Kaelin said flatly, not meeting her gaze. "My name is Rena. I'm a cartographer and a botanist from the university at Viridia," she explained, undeterred. "I'm here to chart the high passes and to collect a specimen. A Floribunda solaris, known in your local legends as the sun petal." Kaelin's head snapped up. His heart hammered against his ribs. "You're looking for the sun petal?" Rena's expression was a mixture of academic curiosity and professional determination. "My mentor spent his life theorizing its existence, proving it through geological and atmospheric data. He believed a geothermal vent on a high-altitude peak could create the conditions for such a unique biome. I intend to prove his theory correct. I need a guide to get me to Mount Cinder." She unrolled a partial map on the table. It was beautifully detailed but ended in a great white blank labeled, "The Unclimbed Spires." Destiny, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Here was his only hope, delivered by a skeptical outsider who saw a legend as a data point. "I can't," he said, the words thick in his throat. "The spires, they are not for lowlanders." "And I'm prepared," she countered, pointing to her gear. "Crampons, ice axes, barometers, anemometers. I don't rely on superstition, I rely on science and preparation. I will pay you well." "It's not about money," Kaelin choked out. He glanced towards the closed door of Alara's room, where a ragged cough echoed. The sound ripped through him. Rena followed his gaze, her sharp eyes softening with a flicker of understanding. "Is someone ill?" The dam of his composure broke. He told her everything, about Alara, the wasting sickness, Maeve's diagnosis, and the desperate, mythical cure. He left out the part about his father, the part about his own crippling fear. Rena listened, her expression shifting from scientific inquiry to one of profound empathy. She looked at her map, then back at him. "Then we have the same destination, if for different reasons," she said quietly. "You have the knowledge of the terrain, the wind. I have the equipment and the navigational science to get us there. Together, we have a chance." Alone, she let the word hang in the air. He looked at his trembling hands, then at Alara's door. The memory of his father's fall was a cold weight in his gut, but the thought of Alara's fading breath was a fire. Fear was a luxury he could no longer afford. "All right," Kalen heard himself say, his voice a stranger's. "I'll be your guide. We leave at dawn." The first day on the Spires was a contest of wills. They ascended the winding path out of Silverwood Valley, a trail Kalen had walked 1,000 times as a boy. But now, every gust of wind felt like a personal threat, every drop-off a yawning maw waiting to swallow him. Rena was a machine of efficiency. She checked her compass every 100 paces, made meticulous notes about rock striations, and tapped her barometer with an almost religious frequency. "The pressure is dropping," she announced as they paused on a wide ledge. "We can expect harsher weather by midday." Kalen hadn't needed an instrument. He'd felt it in the air, a change in the wind's song from a steady hum to a keening moan. "It's the morning wind," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "It blows down from the glacial shelf. It carries ice in its teeth. We need to find shelter before it arrives." "My charts indicate a rock overhang 2 miles ahead," she said, consulting her map. "It should be adequate. Your charts don't know that the wind scours that path. The overhang will be a death trap. There's a cave system below this ridge. It's not on your map." Rena frowned, her faith in her data clashing with his local certainty. "How do you know?" "I can hear it," he said simply. "The wind hollows out the softer stone. It whispers through the cracks. My father taught me to listen." Her skepticism was palpable, but she deferred. He led them on a steep, unmarked descent. The morning wind arrived as he'd predicted, a sudden, brutal assault of cold that turned the moisture on the rocks to a treacherous sheen of ice. They scrambled into the mouth of the cave just as the full force of the gale hit, rattling their bones. Inside, the darkness was absolute, but they were safe. "You were right," Rena admitted, her voice echoing in the chamber as she lit a small lantern. The light illuminated vast, ancient crystals that pulsed with a faint inner luminescence. "This place is remarkable." The tension between them eased into a grudging respect. Kalen felt a flicker of his old self, the boy who had reveled in the Spire's secrets. They pressed on for days, their journey a series of challenges and small victories. The Spires were a vertical world of breathtaking beauty and sudden violence. They crossed knife-edge ridges with 1,000-foot drops on either side, navigated fields of scree that shifted like living things, and drank from springs of water so cold it ached in their teeth. Rena's scientific curiosity was infectious. She pointed out rare alpine mosses that grew only in the shadow of certain rocks and explained the geological forces that had birthed the Spires. Kalen, in turn, shared the lore of his people, the names of the winds, the stories behind the oddly shaped rock formations, the ways to find edible roots. They were two halves of a whole, her logic and his intuition bridging the gaps in their knowledge. On the 5th day, they found the campsite. It was tucked away in a small, sheltered basin, recently abandoned. A few embers still glowed in a crudely built fire pit. Kalen knelt, his eyes scanning the ground. He picked up a small, carved wooden bird. His blood ran cold. "What is it?" Rena asked, seeing the look on his face. "Boren," Kalen said, his voice tight. "This is his mark. He always carved these." "Who is Boren?" The question opened a door in Kalen's mind he had kept bolted for a decade. He sank onto a rock, the wooden bird feeling heavy in his palm. "He was my friend. My father's other apprentice." He told her the story then, the words spilling out in a torrent of long-suppressed grief and guilt. He spoke of the climb on Razorback Ridge, of Boren's arrogance, his desire to prove he was better, more daring than Kalen. Boren had insisted on taking a more dangerous route, laughing off Aron's warnings. He had dislodged the loose rock, the one that had started the slide. It wasn't the wind that had killed his father, it was a chain reaction of pride and foolishness. Boren was exiled after that, Kalen finished, his voice raw. He was blamed for Aron's death. But I was there. I was the windcaller's son. I should have seen the instability in the rock. I should have stopped him. I should have done something. Rena sat beside him, her usual scientific detachment gone, replaced by a quiet compassion. You were a child, Kalen. The guilt belongs to the one who made the choice, not the one who stood beside him. Her words were a balm, but the wound was deep. Now Boren was here, on the spires, heading for the same destination. Why would he be going to Mount Cinder? Kalen wondered aloud. Perhaps he seeks the same thing we do, Rena suggested gently. People don't risk a climb like this for no reason. The thought was unsettling. Boren was not just a ghost from his past, he was a rival. The spires suddenly felt more crowded, and far more dangerous. Their path converged with Boren's trail, a set of footprints that spoke of haste and desperation. They entered the Whispering Labyrinth, a network of narrow, twisting canyons notorious for its disorienting acoustics. The wind, funneled through the passages, carried sounds for miles, distorting them, making a falling pebble sound like an avalanche and a distant call sound as if it were right behind them. Stay close, Kalen warned. Sounds play tricks here. Trust your eyes, not your ears. But the labyrinth was designed for deception. A sudden, thick fog rolled in, blanketing the canyons in a gray shroud, reducing visibility to a few feet. They were moving single file, Kalen in the lead, when he heard Rena cry out. He spun around, but she was gone, swallowed by the mist. Rena, he shouted. His voice echoed back at him from a dozen directions, a chorus of Kalen's calling her name. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through him. This was his nightmare, alone, disoriented, and responsible for someone else's life. His father's face flashed in his mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing it away. He was not that helpless boy anymore. He closed his eyes and did what his father had taught him to do when all other senses failed, he listened. Not to the loud, deceptive echoes, but to the subtle currents of the air. He felt the direction of the main channel's draft on his skin, a faint, consistent pressure. He felt the way the smaller side canyons created eddies and backflows. He began to move, not with his eyes, but with his instincts, a map of the wind forming in his mind. Meanwhile, Rena fought her own battle with fear. Her compass was spinning uselessly, the canyon walls rich with magnetic ore. Her logical, ordered world had dissolved into a blind chaos. She called Kalen's name until her throat was raw, but the only answer was the mocking wind. She was about to give in to despair when she remembered Kalen's words, "It whispers through the cracks." She stilled her frantic mind and listened, tuning out the roar and focusing on the quieter sounds. Faintly, she heard a rhythmic scraping. It wasn't an echo, it was consistent, methodical. She moved towards it, her hand trailing along the cold stone wall. They found each other in a small, circular clearing where the fog had thinned. Kalen was using a rock to scrape a mark on the canyon wall, a signal he hoped she might find. The relief that flooded through them was immense, an unspoken acknowledgement of their mutual reliance. "My instruments were useless," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I had to trust you. And I had to trust myself," he replied, a new and unfamiliar confidence in his voice. Their reunion was cut short. A figure emerged from the fog, gaunt and weathered, with eyes that burned with a desperate fire. It was Boren. He held a crude spear, its tip sharpened to a deadly point. "Kalen," Boren rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "I knew I'd find you. You always were your father's shadow." "What are you doing here, Boren?" Kalen asked, stepping in front of Rena. "The same as you, I'd wager," Boren sneered. He looked haggard, his clothes torn. "The sun petal. My son is sick. The wasting sickness takes him. The flower is his only chance. It's my chance to fix things. By dooming my sister." Kalen shot back. "The spires owe me. They took your father, but they took my life, too. I was cast out, left with nothing. This is my redemption," he snarled. With a sudden lunge, he kicked a pile of loose rocks near the canyon edge. The stones clattered down the path they had just come up, creating a small landslide that blocked their way back. "The flower is mine. Don't follow me." Before they could react, Boren vanished back into the fog-choked canyons, his laughter a distorted, haunting echo. They were not just racing the clock now. They were racing a desperate man. The encounter left them shaken. The journey was no longer just a struggle against nature, it had become a contest of humanity. They found a way around the rockslide, a treacherous climb that cost them precious hours and energy. The air grew thinner, colder. Mount Cinder loomed ahead of them, its black peak wreathed in a churning mass of dark clouds. "That's not a normal storm," Kalen said, his throat tight. He'd been watching the clouds gather for a day, a sickening feeling growing in his stomach. The wind had fallen unnaturally silent, a deep, ominous stillness that always preceded the worst furies. "It's a screaming gale. One hasn't been seen in a generation." Rena checked her barometer. The needle had fallen off the scale. "The pressure drop is catastrophic." "Kalen, no climb is possible in that. It's suicide." They huddled in the lee of a massive boulder, the silence pressing in on them. The charm Alara had given him, a small pouch of mountain herbs, felt cold against his skin. He imagined her breath growing shallower with every moment they delayed. All his newfound confidence evaporated, replaced by the familiar, crushing weight of fear. "We have to turn back," he said, the words tasting like defeat. "I can't. I can't lead you into that. I won't be responsible for another death." The ghost of his father stood before him, its eyes full of accusation. Rena looked at him, her expression firm. "Look at me, Kalen. When we started, you were afraid of a breeze. You've guided us across ridges that would terrify seasoned climbers. You navigated the labyrinth blind. You are not your father's shadow, you are the wind caller. You are the only reason we've made it this far." She reached into her own pack and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. "My mentor, the one who theorized about the sun petal. He died last year. He was ridiculed by the university for his fantasies. He made me promise I would prove him right. This isn't just about a plant for me, either. It's about a promise. We both have a promise to keep." Her words cut through his fear. She wasn't just a client or a companion, she was a partner. They were bound by more than a common goal, they were bound by shared purpose, shared loss. He looked from her determined face to the dark, angry spire. It was a monster, but it held the cure. It held his absolution. "The storm will hit its peak at the summit," he said, his voice steady now. But there's a legend, that the eye of a screaming gale is calm. If we can reach the caldera at the heart of the storm, then we climb, Rena said, her voice resolute. Together. They began the final ascent as the first tendrils of the gale whipped around them. The world devolved into a symphony of chaos. Wind screamed past their ears, so loud it was a physical pressure, threatening to tear them from their handholds. Pellets of ice and snow blasted them, stinging any exposed skin. Every step was a battle. Kalen moved on instinct, his body remembering his father's lessons. He found holds in the dark rock, tested them, and guided Rena's hands and feet, his voice a shout barely audible over the storm. Rena was their anchor. When a gust nearly ripped Kalen from the rock face, her gloved hand shot out, grabbing his pack and holding him fast. She wedged pitons into cracks, securing their safety line, her movements economical and precise even in the heart of the tempest. They were a single organism, moving up the mountain, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. Hours bled into a timeless, vertical struggle. They were numb, exhausted, but driven forward by the image of Alara's pale face. As they neared the summit, the wind reached a fever pitch, a solid wall of force. They crawled the last few hundred feet on their bellies, clinging to the frozen rock. Then, as if passing through a curtain, they crested the rim and fell into an eerie calm. They were in the caldera, the eye of the storm. The wind howled high above them, but here, it was almost silent. And in the center of the rocky basin, bathed in a soft, geothermal glow emanating from fissures in the rock, was a garden of impossible life. Flowers, with petals the color of a sunrise, pulsed with a gentle, golden light. The sun petals. There were dozens of them. Relief and awe washed over them, so potent it brought tears to their eyes. But they were not alone. Borin stood on the far side of the caldera, his back to them, clutching a single flower. He turned, his face a mask of triumph and despair. "I told you it was mine," he rasped. "There's enough for both of us, Borin," Kalen said, taking a step forward. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. A deep groan echoed from the mountain's core. The storm, the climb, the geothermal activity, it had been too much. A massive crack splintered across the caldera floor, separating them from Borin. The section of rock where he stood began to tilt, sliding toward the abyss. Borin cried out, scrambling for purchase, but the rock crumbled beneath his fingers. He was sliding, his eyes wide with terror, the precious flower still clutched in his hand. In that split second, Kalen saw two paths. He could lunge for the flowers near him, ensuring Alara's life. Or he could try to save the man who had caused him a lifetime of pain. He saw his father's fall, Borin's terrified face then, and his desperate face now. They were the same. He chose the third path. The windcaller's path. "Rena, the flowers," he yelled. As she scrambled to harvest several of the glowing blooms, Kalen ripped his heavy cloak from his shoulders. He ran to the edge of the widening chasm, waiting for the perfect moment. He could feel the air currents, the updraft from the vent clashing with the downdraft from the storm above. A vortex was forming. "Borin! Get ready," he shouted. He held the cloak wide, angling it like a sail. As a powerful gust swirled into the caldera, he threw himself backward, using his body as an anchor and catching the wind. The cloak billowed out, a makeshift parachute, deflecting the air downward. For a single, breathtaking moment, it created a pocket of lift directly under the ledge where Borin was slipping. The updraft hit Borin, momentarily slowing his slide. It was just enough. He found a handhold, his fingers locking onto solid rock, and hauled himself over the edge onto the stable part of the caldera just as his previous perch broke away and plunged into the screaming void. He lay panting on the ground, the single sun petal crushed in his fist. Kalen collapsed, his muscles screaming in protest. The storm above began to abate, its fury spent. Rena rushed to Kalen's side, helping him up. She held out a pouch, heavy with the precious flowers. "I got them," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Boren staggered to his feet. He looked at the crushed flower in his hand, then at Kalen, his face a mixture of shame and disbelief. You saved me." "Why?" "Because no one else should have to watch someone they know fall from the spires," Kalen said, his voice quiet but steady. The ghosts in his mind were silent for the first time in 10 years. The falling action of their journey was the long, arduous descent. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of pristine, dangerous beauty. Ice coated every surface, and the paths were treacherous, but the oppressive weight of their quest had lifted. They moved with a shared purpose, a quiet camaraderie forged in the eye of the gale. Boren was a changed man. The arrogance and desperation had been stripped from him on the summit, leaving behind a hollowed-out humility. He spoke of his exiled life, the bitterness that had curdled into a desperate obsession with redemption. He told them of his son, a small boy named Finn, whose cough mirrored Alara's. When they made camp on the first night of their descent, Kalen opened the pouch Rena had filled. The sun petals still glowed with a soft, warm light. He took one and held it out to Boren. "There is enough," Kalen said. Boren stared at the flower, then at Kalen, tears tracking paths through the grime on his cheeks. He accepted it with a trembling hand. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "Live a good life. Be a good father," Kalen replied. "That will be enough." The rest of the journey back was a slow mending. They talked of the past, not with anger, but with the quiet sadness of a healed wound. Boren admitted his fault, the recklessness of his youth, and Kalen, in turn, admitted his own burden of misplaced guilt. On the slopes of the mountain that had been the site of their trauma, they finally found forgiveness. They parted ways at the base of the spires, where the trail forked. Boren headed east to his own secluded village, clutching his single, precious hope. Tell them in Silverwood that the son of Aran is a true wind caller," he said, his final words to Kalen. When Kalen and Rena walked back into Silverwood, they were greeted with astonished gasps. They were battered, bruised, and bone-weary, but they were alive. And in Kalen's hand, he held the glowing promise of a future. He ran to his home, his heart a frantic drum. Maeve was there, sitting by Alara's cot. His sister was barely conscious, her breathing a faint, shallow whisper. Without a word, Kalen prepared the remedy as the legends described, steeping a single, glowing petal in a cup of fresh spring water. The water shimmered, turning a warm, golden hue. He lifted Alara's head gently and helped her drink. They waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, a touch of color returned to Alara's cheeks. Her breathing deepened, losing its ragged edge. A few hours later, she opened her eyes, and the feverish haze was gone. She smiled, a true, brilliant smile. "Kale," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "You came back." He knelt by her bed and took her hand, his relief so profound it felt like he could fly. In the weeks that followed, Silverwood came back to life. Alara's recovery was swift and complete, her laughter once again gracing their small stone house. News came from Boren's village, his son, Finn, had also recovered. Boren, his honor restored, was leading a new life, teaching the young ones about the dangers and beauties of the lower slopes. The rift between the villages, born of a decade-old tragedy, began to heal. Kalen was no longer the haunted man who flinched at the wind. He walked the high paths with confidence, his senses sharp, his spirit at peace. He took up his father's mantle not as a burden, but as a privilege, teaching the village children how to read the clouds and listen to the whispers of the air. He was their wind caller. Rena stayed. Her work was done, her maps were complete, her discovery logged, but she found that the neat, ordered world of Viridia held less appeal than the vibrant, unpredictable life in Silverwood. She worked alongside Kalen, documenting the unique flora of the valleys, her scientific mind a perfect complement to his ancestral knowledge. A bond of deep affection and mutual respect had grown between them, as resilient and rare as the sun petal itself. One evening, they stood together on a ledge overlooking the valley, the same place Kalen had once feared. A gentle breeze, the evening sigh, stirred the pines. The sky was a tapestry of orange and gold. Down below, the lights of Silverwood glowed with warmth and promise. "Do you ever miss it?" Kalen asked. "The university? The lowlands?" Rena looked not at the horizon, but at him, her moss-green eyes crinkling at the corners. "I was mapping a world of lines and numbers," she said. "Here, I've found a world of life." He had climbed a mountain to save his sister, but in doing so, he had saved himself. He had faced the echoes of his past and found not monsters, but forgiveness. He had found his courage, his purpose, and a future he had never dared to imagine. The wind no longer screamed with the voices of ghosts, it sang a song of hope, and for the first time in a long time, Kalen was listening.